And welcome back to Capitol Review. The race to the White House continues to heat up, and there are concerns about cybersecurity in the political campaigns. Recently, the Trump campaign suffered a cyber attack, and that has a lot of people worried. And joining us now is John Sancenito. He is the president of Information Network Associates and an international risk management and consulting firm out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. John has more than 3 decades of experience in the field. John, welcome to Capitol Review.
Thank you for having me.
Well, John, as you know, the Trump campaign was attacked. And can you explain what happened and who might be behind it?
Sure. Not all of the details of the cyber attack have been made public, but the Trump campaign has confirmed that a senior member of their campaign had their email hacked. Typically, an email is hacked when an individual receives an email which contains either a malicious link or an attachment. And when that person clicks on that link or that attachment, it initiates downloading malware to the computer, takes the control of the computer, and allows a malicious actor to be able to access information on it. Either that or they compromised a password from an individual and hacked into the email that way. The Trump campaign has said that Iran was responsible for the hack. I think it's a little preliminary to be able to confirm that, although Google has come out and confirmed that that Iranian actors have attempted to penetrate email on both sides of the campaign. So it is a possibility, but a full forensic investigation needs to be completed before you can absolutely confirm that it was one party or a foreign government involved.
Why would a foreign government want to interfere in the U.S. election?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why. For the most part, some organizations may have the motivation to try and access confidential information, and also some foreign adversaries just want to completely sow discord within the political system within the U.S., decrease confidence, and also then create chaos by releasing trade secrets. It influences political opinions and public opinions on these issues, and a lot of these individuals just want to see the U.S. in disarray. They want to see us disorganized. They want to sow discord and have individuals really question the integrity of our election process.
John, what can campaigns at all levels do to protect themselves?
There's a number of things that they can do. First of all, they need to implement strong cybersecurity protocols. That includes multi-factor authentication to be able to have a 2-factor or more authentication that an individual is who they say they are when they're logging on to either their email platforms or their digital platforms in any way. Also, they need to update their software. Those patches that are constantly pushed to update computers are usually done to patch security vulnerabilities. They need to do that. They also need to have their data encrypted and emails encrypted from end to end. They need to conduct regular security audits, which includes vulnerability assessments and penetration testing by qualified cybersecurity experts. They should also train their staff in awareness on cybersecurity issues. Train them on what a phishing email looks like. Train them not to click on links from emails that they weren't expecting. And then also they need to do incident response drills to make sure that their people are prepared to respond to a breach should it happen. They need to secure their communications, use encrypted messaging platforms whenever possible, and have dedicated email servers dedicated to their campaign that are oversaw by cybersecurity professionals. And they also need to limit the access to sensitive information. Not everybody within an organization needs the same level of access. They should limit access to those who strictly need to know, and they need to have role-based access control. Not everybody needs to be an administrator on a network. That should be separate accounts that are not held by individuals. And lastly, they really need to partner with cybersecurity experts, both from the private and public sector. They should have private security experts on staff to protect their digital assets, and they should leverage government resources such as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, which advises political campaigns on threats and what to do to prevent it from happening.
Quickly, municipalities and businesses have been targeted by ransomware. Should they take the same steps?
Absolutely, the same steps that I just mentioned should be done for all businesses and government entities. No business or government entity is immune from these kind of attacks, but the things that I just talked about are the things that every organization should do at a minimum to help protect their organization. It is a real shame that these organizations don't do more awareness training among their employees, because after all, people are the weakest link. You can have the best cybersecurity, best physical security in the world, but if someone is willing to click on a link and open up a portal to download malware, if someone has a very weak password or uses the same password across multiple platforms, these create vulnerabilities, and training your staff on what to do can go a long way to prevent ransomware or cyber attacks.
John Sancenito, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.